I have a question. Do you think it's possible for a child to develop a phobia of their parent? Here's another question. Do you believe it's possible for one parent to induce and nurture a phobia in their child of their other parent? My answer, yes, absolutely, this is possible. This happened to me. My mom, after my parents' divorce, went on an obsessive rampage to turn me against my dad. And one way she managed to do this was by inducing a phobia in me of my dad. Let's talk about it. What is a phobia? At its core, a phobia is an exaggerated fear that can become so all-consuming that it interferes with the person's daily life. This is an irrational fear. The level of fear is not warranted. The emotion does not fit the facts. When we think of phobias, common phobias include spiders, snakes, heights, social situations, or public spaces, maybe needles. Phobias can involve typically frightening things with an exaggerated response, but not always. It can involve things that are not usually scary at all, like somebody's own parent. Now, I need to make this very clear. The situation I'm talking about with parental alienation is not a situation of an actually neglectful, cruel, or abusive parent. No. This is a healthy child bond. This is a safe, loving parent who is being rejected because this child's been completely manipulated. They've been told horror stories. They've been made to believe so many negative things and beliefs about this parent who actually does love them. That's the situation we're talking about. So I can understand a child who has been seriously harmed by a parent, why they would feel afraid of that parent. That's not the case in this situation. So how can one parent induce a phobia in their child of the other parent? To start, I want to clarify that to induce a phobia in someone else is not ethical. Most people know this. It can cause serious harm. Phobias often stem from traumatic experiences or deep-seated fears, so intentionally trying to create one in another person will result in long-term severe psychological distress and turmoil. This is a form of mental torture, I believe. There are 6 main ways that phobias can develop. 1, through classical conditioning, which is the learning process whereby a person learns to associate a neutral stimulus with a fear response. An example would be if a child is bit by a dog, they're going to become fearful of the dog, and they may become irrationally fearful of the dog, refusing to even look at dogs or crying every time they even think of a dog. That would become a phobia. Or, for example, a person who was in a house fire as a child develops such a fear of fire that anytime they see someone flick a lighter, they start to have a panic attack. These are examples of how classical conditioning can result in a phobia. Now, I do think classical conditioning could be part of this for parental alienation. I think number 2, though, probably plays an even bigger part in the development of phobias of a parent, which is observational learning. Observational learning is basically what it sounds like. People can develop phobias by observing others, specifically children. So what does this look like? Here's an example. Imagine if a child sees their parent react fearfully to a dog or to fire. The child will imitate this fear or learn this fear by observing their parent. Why is this so pertinent, especially for alienated kids? At least in my experience, and from others I've talked to, the emotion in the alienator is used to exploit the child's emotions. For example, tears, sadness. This is a very common one, especially for female alienators, mothers. Simply crying in front of the child about the other parent, about the marriage, about the divorce, about any and all of it, is going to make the child feel bad for that parent, obviously. And it's going to make them also feel frustrated, confused, and maybe even angry and hurt at the other parent for inducing this sadness, inducing this hurt and this pain. Whether or not what they're crying about is true, whether or not what they're crying about is warranted. Most parents, I think, know not to exploit their children's emotions, instead to comfort their children, to protect them from feeling certain emotions. If possible, You don't rub salt in the wound, but that's what they do in this case. Another tactic that induces a phobia, or another factor that can lead to a phobia, is a biological predisposition. Some people do have genetic predispositions to anxiety disorders, to other mental health conditions, making them more susceptible to developing a phobia. And number 4, you have some cognitive factors. What does this mean? Certain thought patterns can be learned and observed and picked up on by children. And when you have a pathological parent, obviously that's not a good thing. So certain thought patterns that have been learned by the child, such as catastrophizing, which is when you assume the worst case scenario and start having an anxious response, assuming the worst case scenario, or having irrational beliefs can contribute to the development of phobias. The child may have learned some negative thought patterns or learned some maladaptive coping mechanisms from this toxic parent. And now this toxic parent is even fueling their anxiety or fueling these toxic thought patterns. The parent's not able to help them resolve their issues. The parent's not able to help them learn how to manage their emotions. The parent doesn't even know how to do that for themselves. This is a scary situation. Number 5 is a huge one, I think, that contributes to the development of a phobia in a child who is in this situation particularly, which is stress and trauma. Stress and trauma can trigger phobias, especially if the person's already vulnerable. With parental alienation, we have a high conflict family situation. Alienation usually starts while the parents are still together. Often it starts that way. So these children have been probably through daily stress in the home. They're probably in an environment no child should be in, with their parents fighting a lot of the time, and then they get divorced. It's a lot of stress for a child. It can easily trigger a phobia. And imagine having that whole situation going on. Your life is turned upside down as a child. And not only that, but you have this parent obsessively breathing down your neck, telling you lies, making you believe certain things about your other parent. These kids don't stand a chance. Number 6, avoidant behavior. This is important too, and this is really important for parental alienation. When individuals avoid the feared object or situation, this usually reinforces their fear, making the phobia even worse over time. If you think about parental alienation and avoidant behaviors, the child's refusing to go with the parent, and the first time they give in and the child doesn't go, you have a moment of custodial interference. The child's been under so much mind control and manipulation. They're so scared and angry, and they're refusing to go with the parent. Allowing them to stay and to not go with that targeted parent is going to enforce the fear. It's going to enforce the phobia. It's going to help build the phobia. And then every time that child does resist and refuse, and you allow them to do, it's going to make it worse over time. Now, when it comes to PA, there are a whole host of tactics that can lead to the development of phobias in the children. But I did a lot of thinking and wrote some notes out, and I've come up with about 5 different ways that the parent will undermine the child's relationship with the other parent, and things that could lead to the development of a phobia. This is certainly what happened in my life. I for sure had a really bad phobia of my dad, so much so that I would have a strong physical reaction of anxiety in his presence, or even messaging him on the phone. So all of this is coming from my personal experience. I'm sure people know that, but just to be clear. There are some tactics that could lead to the child aversion of the parent who is being targeted. Like we just mentioned, if the child is resisting and refusing and the child is allowed to resist and refuse, that's going to increase the fear and build the phobia. That's not a good thing. So imagine you already have that situation, and then you add in, number 1, negative reinforcement. This alienating parent is probably speaking negatively about the other parent to the child. It might be very covert. It might be more overt, depends on the parent. But this shapes the child's perception of that targeted parent, leading them to develop fear and resentment and anger and hurt. But we're talking about fear today. Number 2 is one that we already mentioned, which is modeling fearful reactions. The alienating parent is often a great actor or actress. They will express fear or anxiety around the other parent, even if the other parent isn't in the room, and the child will learn to mimic these feelings. The third tactic that leads to fear in the child would be isolation. The alienating parent will try to come between the child and the other parent with their time that they spend together. They will try to withhold the child or discourage or limit interactions the child has with their other parent. And this is going to breed anxiety and fear. It makes the child feel like they're not supposed to contact that other parent. Number 4, manipulating situations. These alienators are not above creating situations where the child will feel afraid, uncomfortable, or unsafe with their parent. Of course, this is going to feed into that phobia. Now that we've gone over phobias a little bit and how it relates to parental alienation, I want to talk to you about what we do next. So what now? How do we overcome this phobia if we've developed one of our other parent? When I learned about parental alienation, I realized I had this phobia of my dad. And I knew from being in therapy before that the way to treat the phobias is to do something called exposure therapy. Exposure therapy is pretty much what it sounds like. It's exposing the patient who has the phobia to this thing they're afraid of, but to start very slowly and to do it very slowly. It's basically an 8-part process. You start by understanding the fear. And this is basically what I did about 2.5 years ago. It took about 1.5 years to fully say, I don't have this fear anymore, to be around my dad and not feel afraid. So number 1 is to understand the fear. Identify specific fears related to the other parent. This could include feelings of anxiety, worry about negative experiences, specific triggers, or your specific beliefs about your other parent, specific attitudes or feelings that you have about them, and why you're afraid, and try to break it down with logic. But if you've been alienated from a parent and you have been extremely afraid of that parent without just cause, an irrational fear of that parent, there's a good chance you probably have a phobia of that parent. And always make sure you do this with a therapist as well who's highly trained in exposure therapy. But number 2 is just gradual exposure. So you start with less situations that involve the other parent. This might include talking about them or viewing photos, and then gradually you increase the exposure to more challenging situations like spending time together or talking on the phone or text messaging. Number 3 is develop coping strategies. So you'll become equipped with the tools you need to manage your anxiety during the exposure, aka time you spend with that parent, such as deep breathing techniques, mindfulness techniques, affirmations, and other tools that you can learn in therapy. Number 4 is role playing. So you can practice potential interactions you have with that other parent. You can practice things you would like to say to that other parent. If there are questions you have for that other parent, you can practice asking the questions. It might sound silly, but knowing how you're going to interact or picturing how you want it to look like when you interact with your parent can really help reduce the anxiety that you have about it and can build your confidence about handling real life situations with that parent. Number 5 is setting realistic goals. So establishing achievable incremental goals. Start with very small goals for interactions and then celebrate the small successes as they come. 6 is professional support. Like I mentioned, working with a therapist who's really knowledgeable about exposure therapy is critical. 7 is positive reinforcement. It really helps to focus on the positive experience you have with that parent and to build more positive experiences together. And lastly, we have number 8, reflection. So after each exposure you have with that parent or interaction, whatever you want to say, reflect on the experience to assess all the feelings that are coming up for you, any changes that you're having in your perception of that parent, or any memories that are coming up for you. This can help desensitize the fear that you have at that time. Because phobias are irrational fears that don't consider facts, the alienated child often fears the parent without having the evidence or the facts to back up their fear. It's not hard to understand then why alienation or a phobia of your other parent can extend into adulthood. Why wouldn't it? Just because a child reaches a certain age doesn't mean that the intense programming and irrational fear will just go away. 2.5 years ago, I realized I had this phobia of my dad, and so I put myself through exposure therapy. You might be wondering, what the heck does this look like, Maddie? For instance, every time I started questioning, who is my dad? Maybe my mom was right. Or every time I felt scared or doubted my reality, I would act opposite. This is a skill you can use when you want to change your emotion. So every emotion has an action urge. We're talking about fear today, irrational fear. But the emotion of fear and the action urge associated with fear can be to hide, can be to play dead, can be to run away, can be to fight. There are a bunch of action urges, and it's different for every person. So me, for example, the emotion is fear of my dad. The action urge I have with that fear is to run away, to play dead, to shut down. So if I want to change my fear, I need to do the opposite of the action urge that's associated with that emotion. So I feel the fear, I have the urge to run away. If I want to change the fear, I've got to do the opposite of running away. What's the opposite of running away? Approaching. So to change the emotion, you must act opposite to the action urge. So I would act opposite and approach my dad. So, for instance, every time I felt scared or doubted my reality, just started to question myself and my perception of my dad, I would catch myself doing so and say, oh, I'm acting out of my irrational fear right now. Oh, that's the phobia. I want to run away. I want to not talk to my dad. I'm going to approach him instead, because everything else that I've done the past 20 years with my dad hasn't really worked out good for me. And I'm going to give him a second chance, and I'm going to give me a second chance. I'm going to challenge myself, figure out for myself who my dad is and what I think about him and what I believe about him. So instead of spiraling or deciding, oh, I'm too scared to do this. I'm too scared to talk to my dad. When I felt the fear, I would call him. And doing this, I learned to call my dad when my doubts and my fears crept in. Now, can I also mentally talk myself down? Yes, of course. I like to reparent myself all day long, but I think there's something about fighting the phobia and the exposure therapy where it helps to approach the fear, the source of the fear, the other parent. When I doubt myself and my reality and everything that's happened, I just talk to my dad now. And instead of avoiding, which would enforce the phobia, what I've seen happen in my life for the 2.5 last years is that I have to approach my dad, and as I've done so again and again, this phobia has gone to less and less, and we're at the point now where it's gone completely. I mean, heck, to me, that's amazing. So it wasn't easy. It isn't easy. And I'm sure that phobia could be triggered again in the future. But I thought this was a really important video to make because it's so obvious to me that this is applicable for a lot of alienated kids. And I think that I've seen a lot of people too who are adult alienated kids who are trying to rebuild the relationship with their targeted parent, and they're struggling to do so. Like, they're struggling to change those long-held beliefs, struggling to reach out to that parent and overcome that phobia of that parent. So I hope this can help some people and reach the right ears. Maybe exposure therapy is something that might help you to do in therapy with a trained therapist. It might actually help. Anyway, that's the end for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, got something helpful or insightful. Please give it a thumbs up to get parental alienation in the algorithm, and subscribe to my channel. Turn on the bell if you haven't done so you're notified every time I post a video. I'm going to start doing a new posting schedule soon, trying to work out what's going to be best for me as I'm trying to manage my health conditions. I hope everybody's doing well, and I'll talk to you next time.